everyone, welcome back to Unfiltered, the podcast where we make international relations make sense. Today, we're focusing on a type of diplomacy that's become more relevant than ever, public diplomacy. Now, when people think of diplomacy, they usually imagine closed-door negotiations between leaders, trade deals, or even high-stakes peace talks. But public diplomacy is completely different. It's diplomacy that speaks directly to the people, not just within government officials. In simple words, public diplomacy is a government's way of shaping public opinion, both at home and abroad, to support its foreign policy objectives. Instead of just trying to convince another country's leaders, they're trying to influence ordinary citizens, because winning hearts and minds can be just as powerful as signing a treaty. What does this look like in practice? Well, public diplomacy can take multiple forms. Think of cultural exchange programs where students from one country study in another, or media outreach like international broadcasting networks, or even government officials making public appearances overseas. Basically, anytime a government engages with people rather than other politicians, it falls under public diplomacy. Now here's why this matters, especially in 2025. With the rise of misinformation, fake news, and online rumors, public diplomacy is no longer just about projecting soft power. It's also about defending narratives. Governments today have entire departments dedicated to clarifying false claims and making sure their version of events is heard. Ministries, embassies, and agencies now run social media accounts, respond to real-time crises, and use platforms like podcasts and live streams to directly speak to the public. Let's break down some of the main categories of public diplomacy. First, we've got cultural diplomacy, which is probably one of the most well-known forms of diplomacy. This is when countries share aspects of their culture to bring goodwill. It could be food, festivals, film screenings, art exhibitions, or language programs. For example, China has set up Confucius Institute all around the world to teach Mandarin and Chinese culture. Similarly, the US has funded programs like jazz tours and film festivals since the Cold War, when showcasing American culture was seen as a way to counter Soviet influence. Close at home, frameworks like BIMSTEC highlight cultural and historical ties between South and Southeast Asian countries, strengthening regional connections. Sports diplomacy is also another fascinating branch. Sports can sometimes achieve what politics can't. A classic example is the ping pong diplomacy in the 1970s, when table tennis players from the US visited China. That simple sporting exchange paved the way for formal diplomatic relations between the two countries. And even today, sports have this unique ability to bypass tension and remind us of our shared humanity. Next, we've got religious diplomacy, which might sound unusual, but it's very real. Faith and spirituality play a huge role in people's lives, and governments sometimes engage religious leaders or institutions to promote dialogue and reduce conflict. Think of interfaith summits or peace talks involving clergy. For example, the Vatican often plays a role in mediating disputes or encouraging dialogue in conflict regions. In South Asia, religious diplomacy sometimes takes the form of pilgrimage routes or being opened across borders, which can soften political tensions. Then, we've got economic diplomacy, which is perhaps one of the most strategic forms of public diplomacy. It involves using economic tools like trade agreements, investments, or aid to build influence. When a country funds infrastructure abroad or creates scholarships for foreign students, it's not just generosity, it's also about creating goodwill that translates into political support. For example, Japan has long used development aid in Southeast Asia to foster strong regional ties. Today, China's Belt and Road Initiative is another example. By financing highways, ports, and railways, Beijing is also expanding its influence on public opinion in partner countries. So why is public diplomacy really important in 2025? Well, because it's happening all around us every day. Governments are no longer just engaging behind closed doors. They're out in the open, competing for attention and trust. Social media has made this an even more immediate cause. A single viral tweet, video, or campaign can shape perceptions of a country in minutes. That's why embassies are now active on platforms like X, Instagram, and even TikTok, because reaching the public has become just as important as reaching other leaders. But here's the big challenge. Public diplomacy can be powerful, but it's also extremely fragile. If people sense that a campaign is fake or manipulative, it can immediately backfire. Misinformation travels faster than official corrections, which makes credibility one of the most valuable assets in public diplomacy. In fact, some may argue that in the digital age, governments that are transparent and authentic have the real advantage because audiences are quick to call out propaganda. Let's bring this back to a few more real-world examples. During the Cold War, the US invested heavily in cultural diplomacy. Radio stations like Voice of America broadcast American perspectives into Soviet-controlled regions, while music tours introduced jazz and rock to Eastern Europe. It wasn't just about entertainment, it was strategy. More recently, after the 9/11 attacks, the US State Department increased public diplomacy outreach in the Middle East, using exchange programs and media campaigns to explain American policies. And on the economic side, countries like China and India are expanding scholarship programs for international students, recognizing that students who spend years in their country often return home with a more favorable view. So to sum up, public diplomacy is everywhere, from cultural festivals to cricket matches, from student exchange programs to social media campaigns. It's how states communicate with the people to shape opinions, build trust, and ultimately advance their foreign policy goals. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Unfiltered. Be sure to follow the show so you don't miss the next episode, and hope to see you soon.